that you know how it runs if you haven't been participating before. As said, it's a webinar, so you can see me, but unfortunately, I don't see you, which doesn't mean that you are not the most important part of this webinar. So we definitely invite you to be active and share all your questions here directly in Zoom, which is possible with the Q&A function. So you either see that on the bottom or on top, Q&A, or if you have a German setup, Fragen und Antworten. And this is where you can post the whole time comments, questions, and we collect them and go through them and either take them directly or most likely collect them all and tackle them in the end when we go into our Q&A part of the webinar. So just to make sure everyone knows where it is and to get you already started, I invite you to directly click on it and post your name and from where you are joining in today. So for me, that would be Lara. I also add I'm one of the founders of the Climate Choice, and I'm joining in today from Berlin and specifically our new office in Impact Hub. So I'm curious to learn who's here today and who dares to be the first person to share their name and the location from where they are joining today. I will give you a quick moment to see who's the first one who dares to open the chat. And I see there are already a few people, or even a few more. So you just have to find the Q&A setup or Fragen und Antworten. And I have the first one. Venkat from Mumbai. Congrats, you are daring and the first one to open the chat, and very welcome. Yeah, good to have you. I guess it's evening for you. For me, it's lunchtime. Great. Yeah, so now you see where it is, and you can also later just comment on anything you hear or definitely put your questions as well. And with that, typically our 1 hour goes by very quickly. So you are also invited to join our Slack channel. So with the email invitation, you got a link to Slack where you get always next information about next webinars, experts joining, and all the information right about decarbonization. And that leads me also to why we are organizing these choice events. So with the Climate Choice, we are a climate-based startup in Berlin, providing our climate intelligence platform to help companies decarbonize their supply chains. So basically understanding where their suppliers stand, which kind of emissions they produce, which targets they follow, and also which actions they are taking, and to generate a decarbonization roadmap out of that and really get active to reach their climate targets. But doing so, we have noticed in the last years, and I guess everyone does working in the field, that we are just not ready often to start right away. So everyone working on the topic, be it sustainability managers, procurement managers, innovation leaders, and so on, they often have a lot of challenges to overcome to really dive into actions. And that's what we have our choice events for, to share best practices, to look into which challenges might appear on your journey, and to definitely overcome them together. And that's not only what we do in our choice events, but also in our annual Climate Transformation Summit. And we are super, super happy to introduce the next round. So this year, it's going to be the 12th of September, the first time in person. So the last years, we had between 500 and 1,000 people joining on an online event. And now this year, because we go into the 5th anniversary, we very much invite you to come to Berlin. It will be a limited number of people, around 100 joining us. For a whole day of workshops and practical insights. So what you can do is either scan the code here or get on climatesummit.de and get actually on the waiting list to apply for a ticket, because we are screening and making sure that everyone totally fits in and that you will be also there to really participate. So yeah, if you're interested, you can get on the waiting list, and then we will send you all the information, and you can see that you can join in person. So having said that, I see that we have now a lot of people in the call, so that's perfect, because that means I can shortly hand over to our expert today, who's Andrew, and he will introduce himself a little bit more in a bit. But before I do so, I have a second question for you to get active. So I will show you a small survey on your screen, which you should see now. And the first question would be, so that Andrew knows who is joining here today and with whom he's talking. From which role are you actually working today? No, do I show the second or the first one? It's always a little bit tricky to see. Yeah. What role do you have to drive climate transformation? Is it that you are working as sustainability manager or in that team? Do you work in procurement or in innovation in general? Are maybe more data and quality your topic? Or are you working in the area of business development and strategy? That could also be, or potentially other. So we often see that also HR, marketing, office managers, everyone gets involved nowadays. So that is the first question for you. And if you then scroll down, I give you a little bit more time for the first question as well. You have a second question. So how do you engage so far with your leaders on climate? So is it rather formal in like quarterly updates and maybe just in general about sustainability? Or is it even more formal, I would say, rather on a yearly base when the reporting has been done on financial updates and now also on sustainability? Or are you already in a more structured collaboration, which is very much focused on climate targets and the strategy around reaching them? Or last but not least, is it rather unstructured, an exchange that happens more on a personal connection, or as well other, and we haven't thought of the right way yet? So that hopefully gave you a lot of time to choose your answer. And I'm gonna stop it and share the results. So most of you, 50%, work in the area of sustainability. And then we have a lot of people joining from others with 30%. So very interested, what is that? You might want to share that in the chat. You can say which position you are joining. And then we have also 77% from procurement, from data, from business development. So that was a good guess, but the other is very big. And then 50% of you, so most of you say you have rather an unstructured personal exchange yet on the topic of climate to activate your leaders. And then 36% say a structured collaboration. So looks like you're very much working on a personal level already. Then with that, I would say I stop sharing and I invite Andrew to join me on stage. And welcome. Good to have you today. My first question always, from where are you joining? What's your name? So where
Yeah,
are you joining today?
well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Very excited to be here. I'm joining from just outside New York City. And I guess my name is Andrew Wanliss, but we'll get to that in a second.
Great. Yeah, I'm really happy to have convinced you to start just before your breakfast, I assume very early at least, so we can stay in our lunch rhythm. And yeah, very happy to have you here. Does the overview of people joining from sustainability teams help you? Is that what you?
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how much, I mean, it's not surprising from the perspective of some business, but to see how much unstructured conversations there are, because I think it's sometimes harder to anticipate how to do that very well when versus a quarterly meeting, you will definitely prepare for in a certain way. So that's super interesting to see. And then hopefully we can kind of adapt some of the thinking we're sharing today to those types of situations.
Great. Yeah, I think how we introduced also the webinar and on our previous conversations was also right this discussion of it feels like in the last years, not the only days, we have been talking so much about climate targets, often in the context with climate neutrality. Now, in the last few months, I think a lot was also focused on reporting. So this quarterly or yearly update, right, is often on focus. And now also we move, at least in Germany and Europe, towards the European supply chain law. So to really look how can we engage others. But then all this topic becomes so more difficult if you don't have everyone in your company and especially your leaders not engaged. So that's what we very often from customers get as a big topic of, okay, how do you actually know that the other people's get the money for it, proceed in their strategy, not just have targets, but really get into a roadmap. And then I was really excited to learn that this is what you do every day long. To get leaders into that. So yeah, maybe without me talking more, I invite you to share your slides and yeah, lead us through your learnings from the last years, I would say, and the present. And yeah, I invite everyone to share the comments and questions in the chat. And then I would say I come back in the end for our discussion around it.
Yeah, fantastic. And I look forward to that too, because I think there'll probably be really interesting to hear from people's experiences here. I feel like this is something that's quite easy to talk about in general, broader terms, but a lot of this is down to specific organizational dynamics. So the more I think people can bring their own perspectives, the more interesting a conversation we'll have. So let me just share screen. So just checking that's working for
Building up.
everyone.
Right now we see
Oh,
all
you're
the
seeing that?
slides
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
bottom.
Let me just do that again. You should be, how about now?
Now it's full screen. Perfect.
Okay,
Makes it
wonderful.
easier to follow.
So I realize I've slightly restated our challenge here today but we'll align on that. So as you mentioned, I'm from Futerra. Futerra is a certified B Corp. I think the very first organization in the world that was recognized as an exponential roadmap climate solutions provider. And we are very, very much driven by our mission, which is to make the Anthropocene awesome. There's some hopefully slightly unusual language here. I think our point here is fundamentally that what we don't want to do is just avoid climate change. We want to create a world that people actually thrive in and want to be in. So we need to be going beyond that and really continuing to have not just a habitable planet, but a thriving planet. So that's our perspective there. We're essentially a change agency. We do a lot of different things that combine the ideas of logic and magic. So on the logic side, as actually you just mentioned, Lara, there's a lot of legislation coming in. There's a lot of complexity. So we do goal setting, materiality, a lot of in-depth stakeholder engagement, purposes, roadmaps, et cetera, et cetera. But also we recognize that change only happens when you have humans excited about it. It might be your board, it might be your customers, it might be the wider world, it might be your supply chain and different stakeholders. So really trying to bring those two together to get to maximum impact is what we do every day. And as the Chief Strategy Officer, I operate mostly on the sort of more logic-leaning work that we do. We work with clients all over the world. I'd say importantly, and this is a fraction of the logos we could show you, but I think what's important is we work across not just in the corporate world and not just in the mega corporate world. There's a lot of bigger companies here that you might be more familiar with and smaller ones that are useful too. But we also work with a lot of foundations and NGOs, and it always allows us to bridge the sort of conversation gap between the campaigning groups and the corporations that are subject to those campaigns. And I think allows us to have a more holistic perspective of what solutions look like to this space. And the last thing I'll say about the business as a whole is one thing we've done continuously in the 20-something years that we've been operating, and that's about how long I've been in the space also, is that we continue to look for answers that we feel the market isn't bringing, and then we bring them ourselves. So even participating in a conversation like this today at a time when it's so critical to get board support and board action is for us absolutely part of what making change is about, because not all of that can come through the work that our clients ask us to do. So jumping into our core subject today, we've talked about boards a lot, but I think, frankly, the challenge is all levels of leadership and certainly the rest of the C-suite. Sometimes they're interchangeable, sometimes they have very different particularities. In many ways, I feel like there's not any deep science here to present about how to best engage with your leadership. It's for me maybe the art of doing a lot of small things right rather than a specific science. And I suspect that I'll be telling a good amount of you some things you already know, but we can hopefully bring a lot of the stories of how we've seen that solved or not solved. I'd say a lot of the advice I'm sharing is seeing from where we saw things kind of go wrong or not get leveraged enough within businesses. And then we work globally, and certainly I work globally too, but there may be some sort of US context to what I'm bringing today, that will reflect or will not reflect the experience of certain people joining us. So there's kind of three lenses through which I wanted to look at this. One is just why you need to engage leadership at all. And in many ways, that's probably not a question for you, because you're like, well, I need more yeses, I need more action. But nonetheless, it's really important to remember just how much is on the boards and the C-suite's plate today in this sphere. Then talk about the what a little bit, which is what you need to bring to conversations and emphasize to get the maximum senior support. And then a little bit of how, which is maybe some more tactical, practical tips in which we've seen engagement happen more successfully. So starting with the imperative, again, I don't think I need to say too much here, but it's, we're just in an incredible pickup of legislative pressures. And it's, from the EU, you're probably looking at this at the heart of it, but frankly, we're seeing this happen worldwide now. And if it's not on reporting, it's on packaging, it's on other parts of climate, it's on marketing. So this is frankly, nothing. If we've been in the field for a long time, we might see it differently, but it's nothing short of a tidal wave of new responsibilities on a board. And again, the board's duty is to understand this, to anticipate it, to respond to this, and to reduce risk around this. So, you might have the perception if the board's duty is to listen to you and read your report, but they have some very clear responsibilities here that are new to them for the most part. And as you hear a lot in this sphere, you cannot outsource your responsibility. And so this is a really critical learning need for them. And that's before we even get to, that's more on the reporting side primarily, and that's before we get to things like climate transition plans, where you need to be delivering in great detail the results that you anticipate having over the coming years in climate. And you cannot outsource, disclose, SaaS platform your way to a climate transition plan. You need real organizational involvement. And this is probably going to be the bar, not necessarily from a regulatory perspective, but from a just planning perspective in very little time. And so how do we better anticipate that? Lastly, I think business is operating in a time of such volatility right now. We're in pretty uncertain economic markets. We have a lot of demand hesitation through inflation and others in many markets. And we have, since COVID, really much, much, much greater awareness of supply chain disruption. And so supply chain visibility is a fundamental aspect of what business needs right now. Just you take the US alone in the introduction of some human rights concerns, and you've now got over $1 billion worth of goods sitting in our borders because they're doing deeper checks on where things were made. This is a huge business risk. And then that's before we add in the rise of AI, data privacy, these issues that are not sustainability today, but have the same questions around them of what your practices are and how you manage them. So there's a lot of governance questions that are now on boards' desks every day. But the most fundamental way to put this for me is that we are still in most businesses having fundamental business conversations on the one hand, and sustainability conversations on the other. And yes, they overlap a little bit, maybe a little bit more than my circles suggest, but we see this as the biggest gap in the way that leadership is engaged right now. And I'll just give you some examples here. We work with some of the biggest alcohol businesses in the world, on the spirits side, on the beer side. And here's the type of conversations we're having with them daily. Number one, they're looking at incredibly significant disruptions in their supply chain. Farmers are aging out, but also be it hops, be it agave for tequila, be it peat for whiskeys, and there's incredible climate threats to these crops. So you might be out of a supply chain. That's pretty significant. Then there's regulation around your packaging that might be affecting the way that you distribute your products. Then there might be regulation and some geopolitical disruption around where you can export to. And then finally, in certain markets, there's a generational walk away from alcohol. We're seeing a lot of legislation come in that looks like what the tobacco industry faced a few years ago. And yet this is called a sustainability conversation, not a, oh my God, what's happening to the future of our business? It's really untenable that these are still two separate things today. And that, for me, is really the crux of why board engagement needs to not just happen more successfully, but also change quite dramatically, because how long we can continue to pretend these are sustainability conversations is pretty critical to us. So where are boards today? They seem to feel that they're pretty competent on evaluating challenges of human capital and governance, a little bit less so on social, but half of boards, but this is by their own self-evaluation, are not where they need to be on climate. They're pretty optimistic on how quickly they'll get to a better place, but it gets worse when you look at boards then evaluate how well they think they understand this as a whole. You can see here, only 25% of boards consider that they are understanding ESG risks sufficiently. And this is despite saying that 81% of board members consider this to be a huge priority. And if you look at boards going out and seeking additional education on this front, we're in trouble. We're not there. There's a real gap. And yet, if you look at the state of climate goals, we might be very clear on what they mean, but it's a mess. It's a liability for businesses. There are businesses with net zero goals that are only including one scope in that. Sometimes scope 1 and 2, sometimes a little bit of scope 3, sometimes just enough scope 3 to cover the material issues, and sometimes beyond that. And then how they're addressing that might be an offset heavy strategy, none of that at all, something that's more SBTI aligned. This is not a settled territory yet. And as a result, boards should be more involved. And it's our conviction that, frankly, if they understood how much this is still not something that they can just go, please sort this out and get this headache off my desk, they would be inviting you in to share the headache with them. And I think that is actually the challenge for all of us sustainability practitioners. Bring them into the headache, because there's a lot that needs to be worked out here. And if businesses understood how much is at stake, how much still needs to be defined, they'd been in a different spot. And meanwhile, you would avoid what's been a really tough rite of passage for many CSOs, which is to go, I've got it, board, I've got it, we're going to be net zero. And a year later, I'm sorry, board, we're going to be science-based. And then we're going to be like, oh, sorry, we're going to be the new flavor of that. This is a huge disruption for boards, but also a huge credibility hit for CSOs. And by that, I mean chief sustainability officers, just checking. And so this really creates challenges for how we work. We need to remember scope 3 in all of its glory is something that was adopted by so many different frameworks in its very first iteration. It's still very complicated. It's still very arbitrary, all things that were built in by design. So, and may shift a little bit in the newer iteration, but we want all the companies in the world to be running with this. There's a lot to be worked out. And that's when we know what we're talking about, because scope 3, just even as a term, is used completely interchangeably now to mean like, do you mean just not scope 1 and 2? Do you mean the categories within? Do you mean all of the guidance around how you calculate it? Do you mean scope 3 reporting, which is more often what leadership might mean? And then do you mean all of the market mechanisms around that? And we can see just with the SBTI debacle last week that, again, there's a lot of unresolved challenges here, and I think that's a good thing. Those will accelerate as we move to 2030 and we try and figure out exactly what solutions we need. But as we're still essentially pouring concrete on that, we need to be stopping and thinking at a senior level are these the right solutions for business? And business right now is doing a great job of being quiet on all this. 2024 is another great year of green hush, and that's not a good thing. So I think beyond, again, just you needing to engage boards at your individual company level, there's a huge mandate for this to be happening more loudly. So now, how do you get to successful conversations, get to setting the agenda more clearly with boards? Again, this will be a lot of things that you're doing already. I'll just be talking about how to do it optimally and really get the maximum out of those interactions. For us, there's probably kind of 6 key aspects here. I'll be going through them one by one, and it's really just about kind of layering in all of these key aspects into your demands, your presentations, your interactions. I was talking to colleagues about this talk a few days ago, and they were like, "Oh yes, boards." A little eye roll and say, "Yes, the mandate is easy: educate, educate, educate." The challenge is that boards don't have time for that education, but more critically, they don't necessarily have the curiosity. And by that, I don't mean as people, but sometimes when something's been going on for so long and is so critical, it gets harder and harder to ask for help and to recognize that you don't know all the answers. If you can imagine being in a meeting for 3/4 of an hour that is talking about some acronym that you don't know, past 20 minutes, you're not going to go, "I'm sorry, what is this?" in general. And I think in part, a lot of what we need to do with boards is to try and give them more room to re-enter the conversation at a time when the expectation is already that they understand it all. So again, what to remind senior leaders of at all times when you're trying to get more action out of them. Obviously, we talked about regulation and liability. It's a good sign of how prevalent a problem is if Google Images can return 1,000 terrible visual metaphors for when you look it up. And so this is responses to the ESG alphabet soup. Alphabet soup is an expression we use when there's too many acronyms in an industry. So this is obviously a pretty well-known problem. But point is, this is complex. Boards need some assistance in understanding what all of these different things mean, and probably they need an ability to focus immediately on just the things that are important. It's very easy to get into an explanation role and then to sort of outstay your welcome. It's really what is most critical here. And I think what they need here is help preparing for more disclosure, new and different definitions of materiality, more data needs across the business, as you well know at Climate Choice, and then also a reality of fewer claims in the marketing space. And this is a real hit too, because I think the expectation, the number one benefit that boards still see from ESG is reputational gains. I think that's fine and that's true for a small amount of time, but I think we really need to move to seeing just operational realities be a bigger part of what they see here. And what's clear is also none of this is about moral imperative. Regulation, sustainability regulation is regulation. So once it enters that sphere, you're no longer making calls about why sustainability is important. But this is the biggest part of what boards need to hear about. It's also an enormous resource vacuum because so many people are needing to plug into this. Every time we talk to our clients, they're like, "Oh, sorry, we're heads down. We're all on CDP. We're all on CSRD." So this is something that boards need to anticipate too. And if you can help them do that, it's a much better place for them to be prepared for this. The next is really anchoring everything in financial realities. Looking back, it's just incredible to us that just a few years ago, when we would be setting, very ambitious goals, I can think of a fashion client, for example, where we're looking for, 0 negative impacts, 100% positive impacts, and reaching out to 1 million, supporting 1 million people in the supply chain. The emphasis of this was going, is this the right goal? Is this brave enough? Is this the right language? The primary concern was not on how much will it cost us to deliver this. And yet today, it often is and should be. just got an example here of just some of the spend, actually mostly on scope 1 and 2. From Intel, just as one example, but also this is accompanying a $1.25 billion green bond, a climate innovation fund they've started. Like, this is financial investment for business, and it takes financial preparation. So are you making sure that you are always wrapping the CapEx, the ROI of your requests, your suggestions, your plans, your alternatives into how you're talking about this? Because fundamentally, this is now about financial planning. And often it's also about tremendous costs. We've seen it we work with a major educational institution, and just a change in local climate legislation where they're based has upped their financial planning for the next few years into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Not something that was on the agenda of the board, but now is. And it's the duty of, facilities managers to now bring that to them. This is not something that they were used to either. So next is competitiveness, and this is very much a lesson born from real life. We can be presenting the most interesting insights, technologies, opportunities to a business, and once senior leaders see a chart where they can see how they rank in comparison to some of their business peers, that's the money slide. Everything stops, and they're like, hold on, where am I here? How am I doing? These people are ahead of us. And again, this may be commercial competitors that you share shelf space with in retail, but it might also be peers that you are competing with to attract funding. It's a peer set for investors. You need to provide this context of where are you compared to others, because this drives a lot of change, as it always has in business. That's a huge driver of business. And I think it's particularly important at a time when differentiation in this space, a very short number of years ago, still meant having the biggest, brightest, most outstanding goal out there. We can still remember companies just recently telling us how soon they would be carbon negative. And I think now we're moving away from the bold goal and much more into a world of how do we align and make sure we're not lagging. It's now much more market that's guided by uniformity. And we're seeing so many restatements of goals. We said this, we meant this instead. It creates a big credibility issue for goals. Again, this is for the board to anticipate. Are you making that clear enough? Are you showing competition enough? A couple more here. Business continuity, as we've covered, we're in a time of nearshoring, reshoring, onshoring. Supply chain risk is front and foremost for businesses. That we need supply chain stability today. We need supply chain flexibility to be able to withstand these uncertain economic times. This is part of what a lot of supply chain integration and scope 3 action can bring. Are you selling those benefits also? I think specifically at a time when, certainly for more advanced players in this space, a lot of the operational low-hanging fruit is gone. We now need bigger technological breakthroughs, but also we need collaboration through the supply chain to drive further decarbonization. That's not always well understood. We need collaboration through the supply chain to drive better results on circularity. So bringing supply chain closer to the business is a business imperative. You need to make sure that the wider business understands that. A couple more here. Incentives and performance. These are just two generic goals here, but I think the financial outlook averaged for next year for businesses in the US is somewhere about 2.5. So maybe I understated this, but this is a typical growth ambition for a business, commercial growth on the left. And on the right, as you all know well, is a typical climate goal. The smaller of those two goals is normally delivered by about 98% of the organization and understood by that whole organization also. And then the one on the left is understood by 4 people who sit in sustainability office, wherever that is. The one on the right, sorry. This is totally untenable. And this was, this is something that was brought to us very clearly when working with PepsiCo a few years ago. They said, like, we have an incredibly ambitious sustainability roadmap that is probably deeply understood by 6 people in this business. Can you help us change that? Like, how do we get more people to own this and deliver on it? And that's, I think, the fundamental challenge today. And I think, again, this is something that senior leadership really taps into performance is what they are rewarded on every day? Are you talking enough about your need to rethink rewards and incentives to retrain people in delivering sustainability? You're making that part of the conversation up. And just as an example, we're starting to see some really brave moves here. Just recently, Deutsche Bank charged its loan officers to lower the carbon impact of their loan portfolios. And what's interesting there is you're talking about something that could not be remote from the more remote from the day-to-day considerations these leaders have had in the way that they do their job. But they now realize this is the imperative. If you don't do that, you're not going to get to the results you need. So how do we drive that further? And lastly, I hope you won't mind, I borrowed one of your screens here, Lara. But we're in an era, I mean, we're certainly in an era when a lot of dashboards are posing as intelligence and don't always serve us. But we're in an era when real-time data is driving all decision-making. We see it, of course, in retail, where, you know, where my eyes are on a screen, how long I stay in front of the shelf has been the core of research for years. We see it in agriculture, where we're now, or just any business where you can deploy smart sensors. We see it in manufacturing, where you can look at live updates on yield in your factories. This is also what a lot of Scope 3 is about. It's just about having so much better data and intelligence on your business, on understanding how you need to be tiering your suppliers, how you need to anticipate risks, and frankly, what your leverage is to reimagine business models at a time when your suppliers are here to help you reimagine business models that are lower carbon. So if you want to understand, again, how you might be entirely changing your product range, making it more circular, you need that proximity and you need that data visibility with suppliers. This is something that this work can yield. Are you making those points clearly enough? So that's the sort of agenda of like lenses through which you need to be looking at your information to try and make it more practical, more relevant to boards. Now for some possibly lighter touches of some practical things we see that serve people really well in this space. The first one is to match their language. You don't have their day job, they don't have yours. How can you understand? I mean, even things like materiality sometimes have a very different meaning in the financial realm than they might for you. So how are you factoring their priorities, their definitions, their language into your engagement? A lot of that is what we've already just talked about, but it's really, really important to do that and to align with just C-suite priorities as much as possible. The next, and I have to say, I kind of love and hate this advice, is, and you might not be calling sustainability within your business, doesn't always translate perfectly into a lot of different languages. You might already be talking about ESG or things like that, but sustainability in and of itself is not always the most useful term. In fact, sometimes it might be the reason that you get the last 3 minutes of the board meetings like, ah, yes, and one more thing, sustainability. As I think I've hopefully made clear today, most of the time, what you're really talking about is about compliance, is about strategy, is about risk, is about business intelligence. So how much do we need to couch this in these complicated, somewhat alienating, sometimes morally led words when you're talking about the same thing that the board and the senior leaders are talking about all day long? Frankly, I think even the naming of board committees under sustainability is not particularly useful. I know that that's a pretty common instrument in certainly in bigger boards now. I'm not sure that's doing the legwork for us that it should. The next is really, really, really critical. And I'll say it's critical despite the fact that it's coming from a consultant, because it may seem like I have a vested interest here. As we said, a lot of this is just about basic human discomfort of not having all the answers and being caught out by this deluge of information. It's also a lot of, I mean, climate science is called science for a reason. It's somewhat complex. It's not necessarily something, certainly for a lot of board members that veer towards being a little bit older in the business sphere, it's not something they've dealt with their entire business life. It's not something that they can rely on as much experience for around. So, the more that's true, the less comfortable it becomes to say, I don't get this as much as I should. And again, in a world where they wouldn't have time for you to sit them down for hours anyway, unless you've got some very idle board members, which is not something I'm accustomed to. So two things can be useful here. One is just introducing third parties, which is the role that we often play, to go, hey, I know your internal team has been saying this all the time, but here's a little bit more external data. Here's what competitors are doing. Here's some market intelligence around just how important this is. And it just resonates in a different way with maybe a little bit more authority, a little bit more gravitas. So I think that can be really important. The second is to create, and it's often in smaller contexts, maybe one-to-one sessions, room to ask more questions. And the way we've done that is we've basically run sessions where we've said, right, what would be everything you would ask about climate, but have always been afraid to ask? And here's the type of questions we get. Say from a major business, one of the first in the world, in fact, to have adopted a net zero goal as a CPG. We get questions like, hey, what does our net zero goal mean? So this is the level of disconnect between public ambitions, goals that you're sharing with investors, and how much boards understand these. So creating that room for a different kind of conversation. Maybe that's why I was interested in seeing how much informal interaction there is really important. It's frankly like having a doctor over for dinner. Everyone starts going like, oh, I've got a thing on my thumb here. Can I ask you about it? It's a very effective tool. And then lastly, is how do you tap into people's humanity? I would say you need to do this with us, because I think most of the time when people are talking to senior leaders from the sustainability perspective, they're not leveraging the business aspects enough. So I don't want to overstate this, but nonetheless, you are talking to regular people. I think the amount of successful projects and probably the amount of business I've been able to pull in my career that I can attribute to a CEO telling me, I didn't realize how important this was until my 5, 7, 15, 18-year-old son or daughter said to me, like, hey, what is it that you do every day and what good do you create for our planet? And then they went, oh, yeah, let me get back to you on that. Hello, Futerra. And down to, we've had CEOs like be able to tell me like, this facility alone is responsible for, down to the ton, he knew how much CO2 it was putting out because of a personal transformation, a personal conversion. So are you leveraging that enough in some of these conversations? So to wrap up this sort of more practical piece, in an era of third wave coffee, I thought this metaphor would be useful. I'll start with the bottom row. This is, and we see this every day. This is genuine, this is born from genuine experience. We see a lot of board conversations coming from, again, sustainability experts who live and die by this every day, who have so much to say, for whom this is, all they do. Sometimes there's an ambition to share too much client science. You want them to understand everything in as much depth as you do. And that ambition is perfectly respectable. It's very hard to deliver on that, specifically in the context of other, they need to cut costs by 20%. And then you're going to say like, well, in the beginning, there were clouds. It's quite challenging. It's also, sometimes we see people get bogged down in the details, bring a little bit of doom without enough, or too much doom without enough opportunity on the other side. And then in the macchiato category here, speak still to 2050 and far off milestones. I can tell you from most of the board members I meet, they certainly won't be on the board by 2050 if they'll be around at all. So bringing those timelines in is really, really important. So somewhere in the latte mocha territory, I think, is where you find the sweet spot for us, is to really land things. Sure, explain just enough science that this is clear, and everyone loves the flattery of feeling a bit smarter at the end of a meeting, but really land things in business impact, really land things in finance, and bring a little bit of stories to it too. Make it human after all, I think is really the sweet spot here. So with that, thank you. As I said at the start, I feel like this is very easy to talk about broadly, and there'll be lots of different experiences, barriers, et cetera, et cetera. So very keen to get to question time, but hopefully some of this resonated with your different challenges.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, for really guiding through that. I totally loved it and took notes the whole time and like have almost 2 pages here full written. So I cannot, I guess, cover all my questions. So I would get already the first most important one that was also in the chat. How can people later get your slides? Like,
Yeah,
shall I drop you an
I will
email?
share them with you and we can arrange that for sure. Yeah.
Okay, good. Then please send them over to me, and then yeah, you get our follow-up and you can get the slides here. Great. And yeah, my reminder, now is the time to drop your questions in the chat. So if you have more, please put them there, and otherwise follow all the questions that I have. Yeah, I might also refer back to the slides. So maybe you also want to go there because I feel from the
Sure, sure.
beginning maybe in the very, very, very beginning, you shared that you are a certified exponential roadmap solution provider. And I think you said it very quietly in a half a sentence, and maybe not everyone is yet aware even of the exponential roadmap. So, and I totally love it. And we put it all over in our guides and like blog posts and so on to make sure people get into the exponential roadmap and maybe search the learnings they have. So maybe you want to explain a little bit what the exponential roadmap is and why it's like a global network and how also you support in that area.
For sure. And I'll disclose I mean, we're very big fans of their work and leverage it as much as possible. We're also partners with them. We host an event at Climate Week New York with them annually and are working on a number of things. So I mean, a lot of what they're, and I'd rather have them represent themselves, but a lot of
We had them
what
in a
they're about,
webinar as well, so maybe
yeah.
people find that still on YouTube, but yeah,
The
for
clues
everyone.
in their name, which is they recognize that, we need exponential solutions now, we need exponential innovation, and they're focused on businesses' ability to deliver that, because right now, again, all the focus is on getting your emissions to zero. It's a little bit of a zero-sum game in that space. It's not always something that brings out the most innovative aspects of business, and yet innovation is specifically what we need. So they have a roadmap that really clarifies how, beyond reducing the emissions in your operations in your value chain, how you can leverage your entire business to be bringing climate solutions to the world, to be accelerating change beyond your walls. And how do you do that? What are the businesses that are doing that? What are the innovations that are doing that? What are the tools that are doing that? Is really what they're out there to help create. And so even our status as a climate solutions provider, it's actually extremely relevant to carbon accounting too, because as we know today, if you are specifically, let's imagine you're a pure play climate solutions provider, you create electric vehicles only. Your ability to grow within a scope 3 in a science-based context is extremely limited. You need to be setting a baseline now. You might be in year 2 of operation, and tell us what that will look like in year 10 of operation when you're hopefully 10, 20, 100x the size. There's a total incompatibility there because we don't have a way to recognize today where a climate solution exists within carbon accounting. So part of what they're doing is really look at the pathways to build these solutions, support these businesses, and find ways for us to recognize that from a regulatory perspective also. So phenomenal partners, phenomenal. I mean, I think bringing a really essential set of thinking and action to this sector, where specifically, I think in an era where businesses are just sort of scared and leaning back from all of this agenda, they're like, no, lean in, and there's where the opportunities and the growth is.
Yeah,
Hopefully
I
that's
love it.
a
Oh, sorry.
decent summary of what they're up to.
Yeah, but I love it so much, and you said it before as well, is right. Because the low-hanging fruits might have been done. I mean, we live in a bubble as well. There are enough companies who haven't done anything, but you look into solar, you look into like low carbon mobility and so on. But really, then this whole transformation really needs more how to readjust your business model, how to collaborate with your business partners. And there I see like your work really helping companies to transform, and that it's not just a a soft factor, but really the essential thing after you did like solar and so on, that you really look into how can I redesign my strategy as a business strategy and not just sustainability strategy. And then the other aspect that you really need to collaborate with your whole supply chain and even with other peers. So we actually took their concept and do it on a smaller scale. We have our own Scope 3 action group. So really just to learn, because they bring global leaders together, and we try to do that on a more local level as well. So maybe just that as an location where to find you. We do have a few more questions. I bring them in before. I have so many on my list, but I might do another podcast with you or something. Let's see. So someone, Thomas, shared, you have been talking a lot about, where actually the board members or your leaders in the companies are from the headspace right now, but how is it actually possible to also integrate all the external pressure and like not just your board, but like, maybe your customers, your employees. He said like 80 people need to agree with me on the climate change target and so on. So what is it? Maybe you have already
Yeah,
board member who's
I
very
mean, it's a
much
great
behind it.
question. There's a few great questions actually, so hopefully if we move quickly, we can get through a bunch of them.
Yeah, please.
I would put consumer pressure and or customer and employee in very different domains, because trying to get an employee to be aligned with you is extremely different from just responding to external concerns around what you're doing. But because I think a lot of it depends on the shape of your business, depends if you're B2B, but I will tell you from the businesses that have been waiting for just consumers at large to finally prove that they're willing to pay 3 times as much for a sustainability product, et cetera, et cetera. Like that perspective, and that might not be what Thomas is asking about, but I'll just comment on that briefly. When businesses have that perspective, they are playing an extremely long waiting game. There are, turns out, many categories. In fact, there are too many categories where sustainability is a premium that you pay, and successfully so. But if the perspective from the part of the business is wait for the market to tell me that I can just charge more for this, rather that my entire business is at threat immediately from climate change, then to me, that's a sign that they're still not understanding what this is fundamentally about. If people are just looking for that marketing leverage. Now, if you're needing for better support, I think employee surveys can do amazing things. The key thing there is there's a lot of mistakes in the way that we poll people. I see market researchers go out to their business and others every single week and go like, hey, what do you think of sustainability? Like the same thing as any consumer thinks of a whatever 14-letter word. Not a great deal. It's not how I live my life. The questions you want to ask is like, hey, do you care about what your kids ingest? Are you worried about the quality of your air? And things like that. So it's very, very easy to get dull responses from the wrong surveys. It's you have to capture why people really care about this, which tends not to be the way that we talk about it. Or you're asking them overly complicated things. We see this in materialities all the time, where people go like, I don't really know how to classify these things because I don't live in them every day and I don't understand their subtleties. So yes, yes, yes to getting more answers and more data. But be careful how you collect it and be careful what you're trying to prove with that data. Because sometimes you don't necessarily get the leverage points that senior leaders want to see to react on. I hope that's useful.
Yeah, I hear out of it is maybe not just wait for everyone to agree, but some things also get your leaders behind them and then make a strategy to implement them and then show how it's addressing mainly risk rather than just only the next financial opportunity, which it is in the long run, but also to show if we don't do something now, it costs something directly. So focus on that one language-wise.
That's very true. And that, some of this will often, again, there's a lot of different things you might be trying to understand here, but a lot of this comes down to incentives too. For as long as the business is saying one thing but rewarding another, you don't necessarily get the employee take up that you need. Once something is in your personal KPIs, everything changes. That's how we function in the business world. So it's also about really having conversations with leadership about what is it that we're incentivizing. We see this in sales team all the time. We do extensive training now for sales teams, like, hey, you've always sold your product this way. Now, do you want to talk about all of these things?
No.
If I'm going to be rewarded on it,
Yeah. That maybe leads to one more question we can squeeze in. So like incentivation specifically of suppliers and here or business partners, it has a question like, how the heck shall we engage like suppliers in the fourth or fifth layer in the supply chain? Like, how do you answer to that? And maybe it fits also to that thing of scope 3 targets now. They seem to change, and in science-based targets, you might have offsetting. Is that not the easier one? Do we really need to engage everyone?
Well, let me speak to that one very quickly, because I think it's a really interesting question. I think the main thing to recognize is that Scope 3 and SBTI will evolve. And I know that sounds like yes, but in many ways, we're looking for stability. It's what humans want in general. It's certainly what businesses want. I think the truth is, our scientific understanding of the world has changed. When Scope 3 was being done by 5 leaders versus the expectation is it would be done by all businesses, because your Scope 3 is someone else's. Just to calculate your Scope 3 effectively, you need your entire supply chain to be doing that too. Just with that level of popularity, the dynamics of how it needs to be applied has changed. So it's a good thing that these will continue to change. They will change in good and bad ways, because we will actually be looking for the right optimal solutions. And we're trying to get all businesses on earth to do this. We're still in the thousands of businesses that are doing this effectively. So we need, as you said earlier, we're in this bubble of like all of these leaders jostling around. Most businesses probably haven't even got to this at all. Certainly when you get to smaller enterprises. So some of this is a positive thing. It's just going to be uncomfortable as we go, because we don't quite know what we're leading with. But I think trying to build the best tools we have before we're really pouring concrete into like applying them to more and more businesses is really vital. And I think, saying where it will, I don't have the crystal ball to say exactly where it will evolve to, but I think for Scope 3, it's going to be clearer that it is the accounting mechanism and the accounting mechanism only, and it is not the innovation action guidance mechanism. That takes different accounting tools and it takes different dispositions. Then on the engaging stakeholders, it's a really tough one, because you want that, engaging supply chain. You want, as we all know, probably that balance of engaging them positively, not just creating more pressure, more fatigue, more requirements for them. Frankly, I think at this point, it comes from greater engagement with the tier 1s and 2s to start getting back at, because they have those closer relationships. If you're really starting to partner with your tier 1 and 2 partners, certainly critical ones at first or large volume ones, and building up a different quality of relationship, it starts to allow you to engage with those further ones beyond that. The other thing is to look at group action. Like, in truth, you and your competitors are probably sourcing similar things from similar people. Do you start to define things together? Again, not necessarily solely from a putting pressure down the supply chain, but working together to define what the best standards might be and how you can simplify, for example, data intake. So it's so much of the next stages of progress are about collaboration.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think like 2 points really I want to highlight. Like, I think people can get paralyzed now by the thought of, okay, I need to screen all my suppliers, but really to start with like a group of your pilot customers or whatever, wherever you stand, like even the big ones, and that's what you read in Exponential Roadmap, then again, they show it. Even the big ones, they started 1-2 years with like 10 or 20 suppliers to just say, okay, we invite them for a first test, and then you roll it out and you learn from that. And what you said, like learning and sharing with other peers, because you're not reinventing the wheel, right? Everyone is in that process right now, and to just see how are they doing it, interpreting it, do they have any kind of solution already, or even to just see that they have the same challenges helps so much.
Yeah.
We always run so quickly out of that hour. So I have one last sentence, which I always ask, and it's maybe tricky. But if someone just was totally overwhelmed the last hour and you had so great insights, but like next call is waiting, what is the one thing you want people to remember how to engage their leaders?
And I'll use it to respond to one of the questions here. If your board doesn't care, then I just think so much of this, there was a time when this agenda lived away from business. Today, it is core business. And I think if you can make that point well, any board that's not with you there is in the wrong, but they might not know that yet. And so it's really just about getting them to understand you're talking about things that are fundamental to the future of the business, that needs to be on their agenda.
Great. I love it. So make climate and Scope 3 your business and get your leaders to join. Thank you so much, Andrew. I super much enjoyed our session. I invite everyone also joining online. If you have more questions, maybe just directly add Andrew on LinkedIn and drop him a message there. That's always very good to reach out to people, I feel, and be connected. And yeah, otherwise we invite you to our next choice event in May, which will be about the European supply chain law and what we maybe learned already from the German supply chain law to not have such a big hustle to get the other one started. And yeah, also invite you to the summit coming up in September if you want to really have a full day of learning with peers and exchanging best practices. Having said that, see you soon. Have a wonderful day ahead. For you, Andrew, still the morning, and yeah, see you all soon again.
Thanks again for having me, and thanks again to all for listening and asking some great questions.
Thank you.
Great pleasure.
And
thank you. Bye-bye.
see you soon. Bye-bye.